In this video, let's take a look at the Knit Surface tool and see how it can be used. So on the screen, we have a part comprised of three separate surfaces. Now it's important to note that whenever you're creating multiple surfaces, it might be needed to knit them together. And what I mean by that is you're actually combining the surfaces to create one single surface. Now when you're using tools such as Surface Extrude, you have options to do things like cap the ends, or in many cases, you can merge results with surrounding surfaces. But in this case, we have three separate surfaces that we need to combine, and the end result is supposed to be a solid body. So let's start by taking a look at Knit Surface. Now I want to make a quick note that I could do this in one single operation, but in order to point out some of the differences, I'm going to do it in two separate operations. So to start, let's go ahead and knit this top section and the middle section together. Now one thing you'll notice when I make this selection is that we have a gap pop up in our lower box. Now, gap control allows you to close small gaps between the surfaces, and it'll recreate the geometry for you. It's important to note that if you're trying to control things like tangency between surfaces, this gap control is not going to create a tangent relation or any sort of relation between the two. It's going to be the shortest distance possible. So if you need extreme control over your surfaces, especially at the edges for things like molded parts that need to be cosmetic, you need to make sure that you go back and reevaluate why those gaps are there and how they came about. A lot of times they'll come when you do things like offset surfaces because they're going to be offset in the normal direction. So if you have a small draft angle like half a degree, you might not notice it on the screen, but it's actually going to extend the gap between the two parts, even if they touch at the original surface level. Also, if you do things like make selections of sketches as opposed to edges when you're trying to create relations between geometry, that can also accidentally create gaps. So let's leave gap control on. We'll let SOLIDWORKS fill that area for us. There's also another option here for merge entities. Now this is a special type of merge that allows you to merge geometry that is essentially the same. So if for some reason you have multiple faces that have the same underlying geometry, this merge entities will allow it to remove those multiple entities and create one single entity, and potentially smooth out your surfaces just a little bit. So in this case, we don't have any overlapping entities, so merge entities isn't going to do anything for us. So we can go ahead and hit OK. Now if we zoom in, you'll notice that SOLIDWORKS did fill that area in for us, but the geometry again might not be ideal depending on what the end result is or the types of surfaces you're creating. All right, so let's take a look at knitting the bottom together. Now, as I mentioned, we want to create a solid body from these three surfaces. So it's important to note that when you have a essentially watertight set of surfaces, that means there are no gaps, no openings in your surfaces, this try to form a solid box will appear. So once we make this selection, you'll notice that we now have this as an option. Once we select try to form a solid and we hit OK, we've now converted this from a surface body into a solid body. If we take a look at a section view, you'll notice that it's completely filled in. If for some reason you forgot to select try to form a solid, you can always go back and modify that feature. But let's say that you were creating geometry and you use that merge results option, or maybe you had another operation like a mutual trim where it automatically combined the two and you didn't have control over whether to form a solid or not. You can go back and you can use the thicken operation. By selecting your surfaces, you'll get this special option here that says create solid from enclosed volume. And that'll do the same thing as that try to form a solid option within the knit. So as you can see here, we still created a solid body.